When I was a kid, my dad bought a small piece of land in Winterville, in northern Maine. For a few summers, he, my mom, my brother, and I went up there to camp for a few days. Just getting there was a journey. We lived in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, which is just south of Springfield, right in the middle of the Connecticut-Massachusetts border. So we'd leave around 1 in the morning and be there by the evening. I remember the time I had an ear infection and saw a doctor that went to the same elementary school I did, or the time a cashier told my dad he looked like Lou Diamond Phillips in La Bamba, or an abandoned glass dodecahedron house we saw by the side of the road, or the soy sauce we got with our steak in Caribou, or Thunder Hole at Acadia National Park. So I wanted to show Mary Beth the full extent of the state for her birthday. Not being the ambitious driver my dad is, I drove us to Portland to stay at the Inn at St. John after work on Friday the 5th. We'd seen Portland the previous Halloween, so this time it was mostly just a night's stop. It was a nice little bed and breakfast, and I'd never stayed in one before. We were on the 4th floor, so we brought all our things up the narrow staircases and played some chess, while watching some local public access. Mary Beth had recently taken up the hobby because she had become fascinated with the Bobby Fischer-Boris Spassky match and the surrounding political context and how it applies to the Vladimir Putin administrations today. The next day, while Mary Beth was in the private bathroom, I put on Animal Planet. They had a marathon of My Cat from Hell, a show I'd never seen before, hosted by a cat behaviorist named Jackson Galaxy. As you can see, he looks like his name. MB grew up with a cat in the house, and has long wanted one of her own, but I've been skeptical. If I thought the show would really have cat horror stories, I soon found otherwise as he counseled hip young yuppie couples that their cat was a living, breathing individual with genuine needs. Anyway, I wanted to show MB the desert in Maine, which is located down Desert Road, exit 20 on I-95. As this trip was in early April, it was the first thing we learned was closed. We had a feeling it might be, but we did get a couple of pictures out of it, including this dog. From there we pressed on. Neither of us was particularly interested in visiting the LL Bean store, so we drove through Freeport's downtown to Route 1. Pownell was the hometown of Johnny Smith, the protagonist in Stephen King's The Dead Zone, so when we stumbled upon it we had to pull over and take a look at the cemetery and town hall. We had lunch at Bear Claw Scottish, oh yes, Damariscotta, Maine. Almost a caricature of a New England town, right down with the tall steepled churches and shining waters. But unfortunately, this was the one place where I didn't take any pictures, so visit. You won't be disappointed. Once in Orono, we settled into the hotel, then headed downtown for Indian food and walked around for a bit, as I kind of regretted that we probably wouldn't see much of Bangor, so we got back, vowing to check out Stephen King's house before we left. On our way into the park, we saw a visitor information center. We figured it might have some bathrooms and we could find out what was open in early April. No such luck, but it did direct us to another year-round center. This one, too, was closed. Finally, we got to this visitors center, which appeared to serve the national park employees, not tourists. So I talked to one of the rangers, who directed us to an office with more information, and we were on our way. First, we got to the bathrooms, which were at a boat launching area. Then we took the wrong road on our way back to Park Loop Road, and we ended up at the Stanley Brook Bridge entrance to the park. Since there was a parking lot and a beach there, we figured this was as good a place as any to have lunch, and for MB to run. We scarfed down our leftover Indian food and split up. MB ran along the beach, and I took some photos of this nice fountain in the middle of the road. But my brand new camera's batteries were already on their way out. So, in order to find Park Loop Road and replace my batteries, we drove into downtown Bar Harbor. The most memorable sight I wanted to show MB was Thunder Hole. I remember my dad would joke with Matt and me about the name and the sounds that came from this particular section of the park. After a bit more running and a stop to check out more closed bathrooms, we finally saw it. and heard it. Although I suppose MB wasn't quite as interested.
Can I go running now?
Can we go running? I told a colleague of mine from WGBH about the trip before we left, and he said to go check out Pat's Pizza. It was a favorite after-hours haunt of his from his days at the University of Maine, Orono. So we set course. After learning that it was a chain that started out in Orono as an ice cream shop, I somehow expected it to look a little bit more corporate. But this looked homey, more like it was the first location, which it was, and I could imagine hanging out here as a college student. That night, I did laundry as I put the reanimator on for MB, because I'd seen it already. When I brought the folded clothes in, I asked how it was. Yeah, the poor cat, I said, referring to the unfortunate guinea pig Jeffrey Combs used in his experiment to bring back the dead. Well, we'd use Monday to walk around a bit in Bangor before heading up to Caribou. First, we drove around looking for Stephen King's house. Once we got out, we started taking pictures and video of his house and some of the neighboring ones.
Well, that's neat. You can see a couple of generations of extensions and a barn.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's got kind of an L shape to it, which is interesting, because usually that's more colonial house style. You're going to take a picture of that dragon thing?
I will. Then we parked in a garage downtown. The first 2 hours were free, so we figured we'd probably spend $2 at most if we stayed beyond 3 hours and took in a museum or something.
That's a nice porch. That sort of wraparound piazza type
Mm-hmm.
porch.
So we flipped through our guidebooks and proceeded south on Main Street. We headed toward the Shaws, looking for this bookstore and cafe MB mentioned called Bookmarks, when we'd guessed we'd gone in the wrong direction. Right across from the police station, we saw a memorial that we guessed was Civil War era. We weren't that far off, Spanish-American War. After I had my fill of pictures, MB started walking up the hill. I wanted to go back downtown, but I followed her anyway. Across the street from the park was a tiny kitten with rust-colored fur and boundless energy. The second she saw us, she charged straight towards us with so much joy it seemed as if her life depended on it. And maybe it did.
Hi. Could you go back to the car and get the cat food in my bag?
That's kind of a ways. Are you sure it's even gonna be here when I get back?
Forgive me.
I know
Is
it's...
there a
I didn't
grocery
know
store
her
in
gender
here?
yet.
Well, there's the Shaws.
Anyway,
Go to Shaw's?
I tried to get some food,
Hey, baby.
but this cat would not let me go. It would not stop following me. So MB offered to go, and I suggested she quickly duck behind some cars while I distracted the cat so that it wouldn't see her leave. It worked. And so I sat, waiting with the cat. There you are, I said as MB appeared on the horizon. She handed me a phone number for the Bangor Humane Society. I called it and they said they couldn't legally pick up the cat. So I started walking around, checking around the homeless shelter and the mental health center before finally walking over to the police station to see if they could get someone from animal control. Well, we'll send somebody over in a bit, but there are thousands of stray cats. We can't check on all of them, the cop said. Already in the police station, I noticed there was a little museum. Even that attraction was closed at this time, but I snapped up some pictures thinking MB might be interested at a later time.
What for?
They said that they'll send somebody by, but that there's, there are thousands of cats around, so there's only so much they can do, I guess. You okay?
I think we should take her.
We decided to bring her to the Bangor Humane Society and tried bringing her to the garage. But that obviously wasn't going to work without her getting into traffic. So I said I'd bring the car over there. MB was able to tame her enough to sit relatively comfortably on her lap as we drove through downtown, wondering if the voice from the magic-sounding GPS would startle our new passenger. Once we got there...
We just found her. This building, Mary Beth. Yeah. Hi. Hi, come follow me. This is the Bangor Humane Society. What?
It looks like we go in there. This is weird.
Well, that's the Whitley Animal Care and Adoption Center. The sign was
The cat is
Bangor Humane Society.
MB was of course right.
We'll sort this out. Come on. Well, so we dropped the kitty off here, at the Bangor Humane Society. Looks like it'll get some nice treatment. If in the next 48 hours, if an owner doesn't show up, it'll be put up for adoption and get all the care it needs, vaccinations, things like that. So, alright, talk to you later. Bye. I mentioned earlier that, that we should wipe that off. Now we don't need to.
Well, what could we do? It was 2 o'clock now, so we ate our leftover Pat's Pizza and proceeded to Caribou and decided to check in on the kitty on the way home. I'd show you what this leg of the journey looked like, but the last leg of I-95 before Canada basically looks like the Massachusetts Turnpike. So here's the closing credit sequence to Good Will Hunting. We got to the end of I-95 at Holton and stopped into the Visitor Information Center. "Welcome to Maine! How about that? Said this nice, funny older woman. I said we'd already been here for a few days, and even told her of our adventures. She armed me with lots of suggestions and a brochure, and more brochures, so I left charmed and happy." By the way, a slice of home, the Visitor Information Center had XL hand dryers, straight from East Longmeadow, Massachusetts. Aroostook County was always the big question mark in our vacation. That was where my dad had the land in Winterville, and this is where we spent our vacations growing up. But it had been 20 years. We had no idea what to expect. So we went to the Tim Hortons nearby and plotted what we should do for the next 2 days, armed with the brochures from the Visitor Service Center. We must have been near Canada, as I'd always thought Tim Hortons was a Canadian chain, as parodied in Wayne's World. It's sort of somewhere between a Dunkin' Donuts and a Panera Bread. It's not too bad. Well, we finally got to our hotel in Caribou. Somehow I woke up around midnight and I couldn't get back to sleep until 3 a.m., when I napped for another 3 hours. I guess I was thinking about our new friend. At this point we were seriously considering trying to adopt this cat. I even named her Rusty Jumper, for her tendency to greet us by nearly leaping into our arms. I suppose I was also worried about the weather. There was still snow up here, and the forecast called for alternating snow and rain, so I came up with an itinerary that would allow us to finish early if we needed to. MB wanted to check out the yarn shop and the farmers' exchange that we saw in Presque Isle on the way up, and Haunted Allagash, and I wanted to see Fort Kent and Winterville. So we started in Presque Isle and worked our way north. At the yarn store, we got some yarn for MB's crochet projects, and we saw a disturbing gift that looked straight out of 19th or 20th century racist folk art. There was a wine bottle holder depicting the president in a newborn pose, drinking from the bottle. We saw a similar one with a moose as the holder. The president is not a moose. Not even Teddy Roosevelt is a moose. Down the street, we saw an art supply store. I wasn't in the market for any supplies, but we checked it out anyway. I chatted with the shopkeeper and mentioned some of the painting I've done, and that one painting was very similar to the stuff that my grandma used to paint. He mentioned how he'd give spare parts of his frames to his wife to paint. Seemed like a cool place. They were even affiliated with the local PBS station. So now it was on to Fort Kent. It was right on the border of Canada. That's what I remembered as a kid. And it's appropriate, as it was a fort of the Aroostook War of 1838-1839, the war that established Maine's northern border with Canada. I also remember my brother attempting to roll down this hill, pissing off my dad. I don't remember if this was the same summer as my ear infection, but I don't think my dad wanted to be a frequent visitor to that doctor's office up there. Let me give you a tip about the roads up there. Disobey the speed limits at your peril. When I was a kid, we joked that the hills were like a roller coaster. It's not just that they're hilly, but they're not well maintained because they might not be that well traveled. The speed limits changed so often that I was actually pulled over for speeding. The cop was a very friendly and experienced man with a Canadian accent who let me off with a warning as a protest of the unreasonably high fines. We told him about our trip as he realized that our Massachusetts plate suggested we weren't too familiar with the roads up here. I think that might be why he was extra lenient with us. So it was on to Allagash. We'd heard that Allagash was haunted, and that Lake Allagash was the site of an alien abduction as referenced in an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. What we didn't know was that Lake Allagash was in a totally different part of the state. But in retrospect, we got to see more of the county, and it beat sticking around in the hotel room. And it was pretty. It was around 4 when we got back to Caribou, but we really didn't want to go back yet, so we ate at this great little diner called Reno's Restaurant. I had a bowl of spaghetti and the salad bar, and MB had a tuna sandwich. We both had pie, and decided we'd come back on our way down to Bangor. To kill time, we went to the bowling alley near the hotel. MB and I bowled 2 strings each, then I bowled 1 more. Aside from maybe drawing, bowling was the first thing I ever liked to do in my whole life. We got back to the hotel. I woke up early, showered, and used the internet. Sometime around 7 o'clock, the power went out. "Let's get the hell out of here," I said. So MB showered, and we got into our mud-drenched car and headed for Reno's before heading back to the Bangor Humane Society. We took Route 11 until we got back to Interstate 95. Running low on gas, this is where I filled up. I guess I didn't know the old-style pumps and how they're supposed to work. I guess they're supposed to hang loose, as opposed to forming a tight seal as with newer pumps. So it got stuck. We got back to the Bangor Humane Society exactly 48 hours after we left. So I went in first and asked the young woman at the desk for a status update. She said that the kitten was still being cared for, and that we couldn't see her just then, but that she might be available for adoption in the next few days. I said we were interested, but we were leaving for Boston from York the next day, so that might be a potential hurdle. In the meantime, MB made friends with some of the other cats, including one that looked very similar to Rusty Jumper. I was hungry, and MB was thirsty, and we finally got to bookmarks. MB got a mango smoothie, and we both browsed the stacks upstairs, even this full rack of Stephen King books. But I was in the mood for Thai. A few days earlier, we saw a ton of Thai places, so we figured Bangor must have the taste buds for good Thai food. It was nice to be able to order tofu again. And look at how they arranged the rice on this plate. But it was time to go, so we headed to York on 95. We stayed at the Union Bluff Hotel, where we had stayed almost exactly 6 years earlier, and ordered some margarita pizza and nachos while we caught some movie on TNT. There was a scene that must have lasted like 20 minutes, all in subtitled German, which clearly took place during World War II. We looked it up and realized it was Inglourious Bastards. The long stretches without any English in a fairly mainstream Hollywood movie impressed us. It reminded us of Fritz Lang's Manhunt. The next morning, I emailed the Humane Society to put my request in writing, and we headed to a place called Rick's for breakfast. Speaking of World War II movies. The previous day, I had an omelet, so today I wanted French toast, and MB had eggs Florentine. When MB was in the bathroom, I checked my email on the phone and got the following reply. "Thank you very much for your interest in adopting the cat you brought in. We named her Pixie. Unfortunately, Pixie has tested positive for feline leukemia. Therefore, we cannot put her up for adoption here. We have plans to send her to a rescue that specializes in cats like Pixie, and placing her in homes experienced with managing cats with this kind of health condition. Thank you for bringing her in and for your interest." I guessed it was my turn to cry. We knew Pixie was going to a good home, but we wished she didn't have the virus that could lead to cancer. We went home, did some errands, and got on with our lives. A couple of days later, I got another email. "Hi, Eric. We just wanted to send you an update on the kitty you brought in. She was transferred to a rescue the other day and has already been adopted by someone who knows how to provide the care specifically for cats with feline leukemia. They renamed her Elaine, and I'm sure she will have an awesome life. Thanks so much for bringing her in and for following up with her. We appreciate it." I smiled and forwarded it to MB. There was no way we'd ever forget this trip to Maine.